Okay, so you think denim's American, right? Levi's, Gold Rush, that famous patent, that's a story everyone knows. But here's the thing, the real roots of denim don't go back to 1873, they go back to a plant, and that plant goes back 6,000 years. Before the United States was formed, before the rise of Rome, before the pyramids, there was indigo. Welcome to DU001, Indigo Around the World. This is the story of indigo and how the indigo fera plant that makes our favorite dye traveled the globe, splitting apart, affecting every culture it touched, and then coming back together in the most popular piece of clothing ever made, the American blue jean. So let's go back, not to Peru 6,000 years ago when it was first discovered, but to India only 2,500 years ago. In fact, the name indigo actually comes from the Greek word indikon, which just means from India. Look, you've made it as a plant when you just get named after an entire continent. Yeah, just call the plant the whole thing. So there's this plant, Indigo fera, totally unremarkable, small, green, nothing special, you'd walk right past it. But locked inside its leaves is something extraordinary, a pigment. And to extract that pigment into a dye, here's what you have to do. First, harvest the Indigo fera leaves. You don't dry them out, you soak the fresh leaves in water for days until they ferment. Why? Well, because indigo doesn't actually exist in the plant. Indican does, and it's locked to a glucose molecule. And indican isn't a dye, it's kind of nothing special. But when you submerge the leaves in water and it ferments, an enzyme is produced that effectively breaks that lock, and indigan turns into indoxyl. That's when your vat turns from clear to yellow. Next, you add oxygen to the vat by literally beating the water, and something magical happens. The vat oxidizes, forming indigo. It turns blue. That's it, that's the trick. An enzyme plus an oxygen molecule, and we're off and running with the most beautiful, versatile dye in the world. From India, the knowledge of how to extract indigo begins to travel. It goes east towards China, west towards Europe, and south towards West Africa. The African chapter of indigo is the part that most denim histories overlook, and I think it's one of the most important parts of the story, actually. West Africa didn't just receive indigo from India, it took that knowledge and built something completely its own, something spiritually rich, culturally deep, and centuries old, and that knowledge eventually came to the Americas with enslaved people. In Nigeria, people had deities for the dyeing craft. In the city of Kano, they had entire neighborhoods of communal dye pits, and the indigo trade made it one of the wealthiest cities in West Africa for centuries. In Mali, the Bambara developed mud cloth, hand-woven cotton painted with fermented riverbed mud in these intricate geometric patterns. And here's the thing, every symbol meant something. Stories, histories, warnings. It was literally a language written in fabric. Indigo was worn at birth, at marriage, at death. So when Europeans arrived and started establishing indigo plantations in the America, they didn't bring the knowledge of how to grow and process the plant. They took it from enslaved West Africans whose expertise had been built over generations. The blue in early American denim carries that history, and it's important that we acknowledge that the true roots of denim in the United States actually began, in part, in Africa. Meanwhile, indigo knowledge was traveling east, first to China, and then from China to Japan around the 5th century AD. And Japan did what the Japanese do. It took indigo, studied it, refined it, and it became so devoted to the craft, it almost becomes a different thing entirely. They called the tradition aizome, and it was a craft that was rooted in the idea that a thing worth making should be made well. That's basically the entire ethos of Fit Underground, by the way. As one example of their rich tradition, Japanese artisans developed something called tsukumo, an indigo paste that gets fermented for months before you can even use it. Months. So, fun fact, when American soldiers arrived in Japan after World War II wearing their Levi's, they weren't arriving in a country that had never thought about indigo and cotton. They were arriving in a country that had been thinking about indigo and cotton for 1,000 years. Okay, on to Europe. This is where the fabric we know of as denim finally gets its name. Interestingly, Europe was actually relatively late to indigo and initially resistant to it. Europeans had their own blue dye plant called woad. The problem? Woad produces about 1/30th the pigment of Indian indigo. Whoa, woad. 1/30th. That's like 3.3% of the yield of indigo fera. The upshot? You need massive amounts of the stuff to get anywhere near the same depth of color. So when Indian indigo started arriving in European markets in the 1500s, it was so obviously superior that the woad industry completely crapped their pants. They panicked big time. Guilds lobbied to have indigo fera banned. They called it devil's dye. In some German states, and I'm not making this up, possession of Indian indigo carried the death penalty for a dye. Nice plant, time to die. Over time, commerce defeated paranoia, as it often does, and indigo flooded into Europe. In two specific cities, something really important happened. In Nimes, France, weavers developed a durable twill cotton cloth using indigo-dyed warp yarns over undyed weft yarns. They called it serge de Nimes. Serge Denims was imported to the Americas, where it eventually became simply known as denims or denim. In Genoa, Italy, sailors and dock workers wore a similarly tough indigo-dyed cotton called blue of Genoa, or bleu de jeans, which eventually became blue jeans. So the fabric had its name. Now it just needed the right moment, and the rugged gold miners in the American West provided just that. By the 1800s, here's where we are. The indigo fera plant that began in India has now traveled around the entire world. You've got West African dyeing expertise eventually carried to the Americas by enslaved people. You've got European fabric, the diagonal twill weave from France and Italy, and you've got Japanese craft tradition waiting in the wings. Three separate branches of the same ancient tree, all heading towards the same moment, mid-19th century California. That's when a Bavarian merchant and a Latvian-born tailor created a patent that changes the fashion world forever. We'll discuss that in the next video. If you want to read the full story, head over to Denim University at fittedunderground.com. Until then, we'll see you in the next one.